Hiya knitters. Now, if you watched a couple of weeks ago in my Beth Knit Simple Seamless Satchel, I purposely made a few mistakes in it to show you how different a project can be just by a few small changes. I did mention that I was knitting the correct version, and this is just a quick overview so you can see those comparisons. So I'm just going to play the original video and cut to where I made the mistakes for you to see. Now, the first difference in this pattern, which was actually the inspiration for the whole video, was that I didn't have the correct size tips for this project, and I'll highlight it better further on in the video. You can already see the potential effect the different size tips have. This is using the correct size, whereas this is using a smaller size. I will go further into this later on, but just to mention the first mistake made on this. So I mentioned about doing a provisional cast on, which creates a neater seam. That pops up in a minute in the original video. So first I'm going to cover the difference between stocking and garter stitch. Now, here is the correct bag, and here is the one I knitted in the video. And as you can see, the differences here is, so both of these I cast on 6 stitches. Obviously this one I use 4mm needles, this one I use 5mm needles, the correct size. But as I knitted every row here, doing garter stitch, it creates an actual strap. So it doesn't curl, it is flat, it's sturdy, it doesn't dig into your shoulder. It's a good handle. But, as you can see in the video, if you did stocking stitch without reinforcing it, it just turns into this rope. It's way too stretchy. So I have a tiny bag on a very long handle. So doing things like bags, this is more what you'd want for a comfortable bag. So on that, as you saw in the original video, when roughly picking up the stitches, it's not as nice, it's not as neat. I've got gaps either side. It's just poor. It's not that great. But when I did do the provisional, it's pretty much seamless. Easier to work with. Just sturdier strap. It's less likely to become undone or fray or break. So there's that one.
Does the trick.
So once again, this is the original, this is the correct one. It's so much easier just knitting straight onto the larger needles. Here, I don't know how well you can see, it's very uneven in between the two. It's very uneven between those two rows. That's because I was struggling to get the stitches across onto the larger needles. It was stretching them. I almost had a couple of snaps because this is just acrylic yarn. It's just a cheapy yarn really. Whereas with this, going straight across just straight away made the beginning of this lacy pattern. So yeah, always transfer needle to needle. Don't just change your tips and potentially damage what you've already made. So this part is very clear. On a smaller needle, I believe this was on 5mm needles at this point, you get what looks like a chunky uneven moss stitch from it. There's a little bit of gaps in between, but not that much. Whereas using correct size needles, which were 10mm at this point, properly show it off, it just creates this mesh, lacy, what you'd expect from a grocery bag design. Really stretchy, really supportive. You can fit a lot more in this one than that one. You'd want to do your shop with this. You'd want your kid to do your shop with this. So yeah, turn the bag inside out before the bind off. Didn't turn the bag inside out and the bind off. So if I just show you, try and show you. Rather than creating an obvious seam, it just scrunches along here, which means keeps it stretch, very supportive. There was a comment in the original pattern, someone suggesting to reinforce your bind off with ribbon or material or something, just so the bag is stronger. But I've used this a couple of times and this will do. On the inside, ooh, it looks like that, which, as I didn't turn this one inside out beforehand, is what this looks like. It's bulky, it's not pretty, it keeps it as a square, doesn't aid in the stretch. Yeah, turn your bag inside out for your seams. To do the 3 needle bind off on this bag as well, I will mention that I used my 2 10mm and then I used the one of the 5mm to bind it off. So I don't know, you can see there it creates more of this round shape because it pulled it all together down there, whereas if I was to use another 10mm it would have been more of a square at the bottom rather than this nice little bag shape. How I ended this video was that even if you make mistakes, there's things to learn from it, and it doesn't mean that your work is completely ruined. You can find other uses for it. So I mentioned this will be donated to a friend's little girl who has taken a couple of bags that I have knitted and apparently loves them, so it's going to a good cause. It's also to state when you make mistakes, have evidence of them, have photos of them. I've mentioned before I've kept scraps of my beginner's yarn when I was learning the basics, just so I've got them there to show how far I've come. If you're ever having a day where you don't think you're getting it or you're making mistakes, it's always good to see your own progress. So here is one. This is the sort of mistakes I would make all the time when I was starting knitting, and now that I know a little bit more, this is what I can produce. Now, I'm glad I've got this video because in the future I'm sure I'll knit something even more amazing than this, and I'll have this to compare to it. Even though there is nothing wrong with this, it's nice to see what I've learnt. So yeah, this isn't really one of my usual videos, but I said I'd do a catch up with you guys, so here you go. If you like this, leave a comment below. If you have any suggestions, leave a comment below. If you want weekly updates on everything HiyaHiya, like, subscribe, head over to our Instagram, our Facebook, Twitter. I've got all the links for our social media below. And until next time, happy knitting.